Good morning, everyone. I'm Hanny Corrales, Director of Economic Development for this great city. I want to welcome you this morning. It's an absolute privilege to see so many people that I haven't seen for some time. So thank you for joining us. This annual event continues to grow every year, and I want to thank you for taking the time to join us this morning. I'd like to acknowledge a few guests before we begin this morning. But first and foremost, please join me in thanking Scotiabank for sponsoring our event this morning. In the interest of your time, as I acknowledge the following two groups, please hold your welcoming applause till after I introduce them. From Scotiabank, we have with us Dr. Warren Jeston, who is Senior Vice President and Chief Economist for Scotiabank, Roxanne Bouchard, Director of Private Client Group, Frank Guido, Director of Commercial Banking, Greg Nulfield, who I understand couldn't be with us this morning, but Frank is Manager of Scotia McLeod here in Barrie. And of course, many of you know Mr. Tom Robinson, Community Manager of Scotia here in Barrie.
One of the benefits of the job, and you've heard a little bit of an outline as to what I do, is I get out to talk to people in the real world. So that coming here, or where I was last night in Burlington, or yesterday morning in Brampton, or the night before in Kitchener, gives me a real world idea as to how the business community is doing. In some times that are, some people would say very challenging, but I look at them as very exciting, because the world is changing rapidly. Some of the best good news that I could bring to you right now is that we believe the U.S. economy is cyclically improving. Americans are finally back in the stores, buying more things, buying more cars, buying more houses, and we believe that revival is going to continue through next year and beyond. But if you look at the world changing right now, it is changing very fundamentally. It's not a cycle, it's a trend. And that trend is very powerful. So when I travel outside the country, as I do quite often, as I will be next week, I find that there are new markets out there, and they require a change in the way we look at the world, a very fundamental change. So a lot of my remarks are going to be around that. But I'd like to start out by disabusing you of the view that economists actually know where we're going. Because economists tend to be trained in how to interpret a business cycle. And a business cycle is familiar. It's got a certain syncopation. It doesn't always repeat in the same way, but it's at least similar. Whereas the world is changing very fundamentally, neither business nor economists have really seen that before. And that's the issue that we're facing right now, because the world over the last decade has changed fundamentally, and you ain't seen nothing yet. Over the next 5 to 10 years, the shift will be absolutely enormous. And that shift is being driven by countries that for a lot of people are very unfamiliar. It is the so-called emerging world, the new world rising. And you can see what's happened over the last decade to put that into context. The first thing I would point out, and I'll tell you a number of stories here, the first one would be a China story. Because think about what we thought about China a decade ago. They were the producers of low-cost consumer electronics that our kids liked. TVs were coming from there. At that time, it would be desktop computers and then laptops that were going down in price. They were very effective competitors globally. But how do we look at that market today? In the media, you will see time after time stories about the equity markets having a bad day because there was a bad news story out of China. You wouldn't have heard that a decade or two ago. And the reason is fairly straightforward. If you're in the commodity business, and for many areas of Canada, commodities drive things, nickel, copper, zinc, iron ore, coal, potash, uranium, increasingly in agriculture as well, the outlook depends on new world demand. All of the net increase in demand for many commodities is going to be coming from these economies. So if you have a bad news story about China, you probably don't think that commodity prices are going to be all that buoyant. And that exports in that particular sector are going to be that strong. It's as simple as that. But it's expanded beyond the commodity space. It's into manufacturing. In Ontario, we are very strong in the auto sector still. although we've gone through challenging times. And the good news, of course, is Americans are buying more cars. The average age of a car down in the US is now 11 years. It used to be below 8. And as they die on the side of the interstate highways, people have to buy more. And of course, that is cyclically improving our auto sector. But where's the trend here? There are a number of trends that we have to be paying attention to. One, within the North American space, while we are having recalls of people producing more cars, SUVs and the like, a lot of the investment is now drifting into the US South and into Mexico. In the 1990s, we were getting more than our share of investment relative to the size of our population and market, and now we are getting somewhat less. And in cars, what is being added nowadays? Is it more steel? Is it more plastic that we're putting in? No, it's consumer electronics. The average amount of consumer electronics in a car a few years back was under $2,000. Now it's over $3,000. And that's where it's growing. These are the challenges for our businesses to catch that particular wave in North America and in other areas. The trend issue is fairly straightforward. The largest car market in the world right now is not the NAFTA zone, Canada, US, and Mexico, it's China. It produces and sells more cars and trucks than Canada, the US, and Mexico combined. And it's also one of the fastest growing car markets in the world. So in North America, we've seen fairly significant growth over the last year in car demand. And in China, they're worried that that growth has fallen below 20% year over year. We're not even close to those sort of figures. China is expecting to double the capacity of its auto sector in the next 4 years, and it already produces a quarter of world motor vehicles. So if you're in GM or Ford, or if you're in the luxury car segment, for example, producing Mercedes or BMW, that is a market that you pay attention to. Canada tends to export on a north-south axis. The challenge for our auto sector is going to be, like many countries, how do you plug into those particular opportunities? It's not going to be through long production runs, the way we have done things in the past. It's going to be small and medium-sized firms that are on technology in terms of their product or service design. They are value-added, they are less US and Eurocentric, and they are plugged into either firms that are in global supply chains or exporting themselves. And you may say, well, we don't do that. We do, because I talk to firms every day that are succeeding in this new world environment. Now, I've mentioned manufacturing, I've mentioned the commodity space. How about services? Well, I'm actually on Monday talking to a global tourist conference down in Miami. And I've been talking to that group for a number of years, and for the longest time we were talking about, well, when are the Americans going to start traveling again? We talk about this a lot in Canada. Or the Brits, or the French, or the Germans, because after all, these countries are big spenders globally. Last year, the #1 supplier of tourist dollars in the world was China. And in many ways, the population there hasn't really started traveling yet. And they're already #1. So whether you're looking at the commodity space, the manufacturing space, or service industries, the world is changing. We are fast forwarding into the future at a very rapid rate. And our challenge, and indeed our opportunity, is to plug into that particular wave. So economists have a hard time figuring out where we're going simply because we've never been there before. In a very true sense, it's not a cycle, it's a trend. But we have to make those exploratory type of trips in order to figure out how we can plug into those opportunities. Second thing that really frustrates economists nowadays, it seems, is that we like to talk about all things economic. When we talk about financial markets, give you a fearless forecast of interest rates, the exchange rate, and the like. But many of the things that are going to influence us are going to come from government decisions. Okay, when I'm out in Western Canada, which I was a couple of weeks ago, which I will be at the end of next week, the big deal is pipelines. There's oil and natural gas. So a pipeline into the US is going to be very important. The expansion of the Keystone Pipeline, very important for getting Alberta oil out of the province. And of course, pipelines to the West Coast. are important, oil and gas, because the prices for those commodities are substantially higher if you can get them into world markets. Because even though the US economy is recovering, the speed limit on growth is probably in the order of 2 to 2.5%. China's having a bad year. Its growth is under 8%. So the difference is very palpable. And overall, the political decisions that we've made in BC, in the US, and across Canada, because we're also talking about building an oil pipeline into St. John, New Brunswick, we've got a big refinery there, are going to have a material impact on Canada's prosperity and job creation. Political decisions matter a lot to economic prosperity. The right decisions, at least from a business point of view, can create enormous jobs. Now that I've told you two things that tend to frustrate economists in terms of forecasts, I'm going to give you my economic forecast as where things are going. And I'd like to start out with the bad news first, because I end on a high note, turn it over to the mayor, and they can continue in that particular trend. So let's talk about Europe. If you're watching CNN or CNBC, you have probably heard more about Greece or various parts, recently Cyprus, than you ever wanted to know. And pretty soon you may be hearing about Slovenia or a variety of other places like Malta. Europe has a number of problems. You've got to remember the context here. It's a much older population than Canada. It is a declining population. And many countries are debt heavy. So we think about it as too much debt or too big a deficits. But the countries that have big deficits and debt are trying solutions that have put them into recession. So you're talking about Greece or Portugal or Spain or Italy or right about that. So it's not only a debt deficit issue, it's an economic issue, but it's also a financial market issue, because the debt was coming from, or the lending was coming from, their financial institutions. And financial institutions in Europe have tried to improve their finances, their balance sheet, by cutting down lending. Now you may ask yourself, I ask myself this a lot, what are banks good for anyway? And banks enable growth, right? Lending to businesses and consumers basically greases the growth process. In Europe, banks are disabling growth by pulling back. We have the strongest banking system in the world here. The US has improved, but many banks are still walking wounded. Credit isn't there, and the expansion is limited. But in Europe, we have a financial crisis that have effectively limited the potential of their financial institutions to add to growth. So it's a debt and deficit problem, an economic problem, a financial problem, but it's also a political problem, right? How would you like to vote for somebody that says, vote for me because I'm going to reduce your standard of living over the next 5 years? It's a tough platform. And you are finding one of the big issues right now in Europe is government's commitment to solving some of the very, very tough problems that we don't have here. Our problems in Canada on the fiscal side pale in comparison to what we are seeing in Europe. We live in the best country in the world in many ways. But in Europe, those political issues are really threatening to cause governments to move away from very necessary solutions that have to be put in place over the next 5 to 10 years. Let's say you have a kid that's graduating from Georgia College or a variety of other places, and they were top of their class, highly motivated. I got one of those that tends to be very, very motivated in terms of getting into the workforce. Of course, I got 4 kids, so I got a couple more. But by and large, you're finding that in Europe, if you have those highly motivated kids graduating, their career opportunities are somewhat limited. Because in Greece and Portugal, the youth unemployment rate is nearly 60%. It's a whole lot better in Italy because it's almost 40%. We worry in Canada that it's 13%, and we should be worried. We should be creating more jobs, and we have to develop ways of doing so. But by and large, in Europe, that big bundle of problems, economic, fiscal, financial, political, social, suggests to me that that area of the world is going to have problems for the next 5 to 10 years. We are negotiating a free trade agreement with Europe, and the US wants to do the same thing, because it is a familiar market. Okay? It's much harder to go into unfamiliar markets. but Europe is not going to be growing. Some of Canadian businesses are going to do very well there, but overall, it's a market share game. It's not a growth game. Europe, if it gets back on its feet, will be growing at 1 to 1.5% in good years. Right now, it's not growing at all. It's in recession. There's opportunities there, but they're different type of opportunities that you see in some of the faster growing areas, where in many cases our businesses can be pioneers in offering goods and services that we think of as fairly normal here. Certainly in banking, we're finding that around the world. Scotiabank's in 54 countries, and we are actually bringing products and services to markets that did not see those in the past. So how does Europe affect us? Well, it's not in terms of growth opportunity, in terms of exports, it's really affecting our financial markets. Because Europe's problems, alongside the fact that the world is changing a lot and has a lot of political uncertainty, are getting global investors pretty nervous. They're not looking for that extra percentage point of yield anymore. They're looking for safety, security, and liquidity. When I was talking to one client last night, their comment was, we're not so interested in getting that extra half percentage point in yield. We want to hold on to what we got. And global investors are very much in that mindset. And they're looking to the US, in a way, to provide that outlet. Now you may say, well, I've been watching the news, and the US government is in big problems. They got big debt, or they got big deficits, although the good news on the deficits is it's below $1 trillion, because it hasn't been below $1 trillion in 4 years. The bad news is it's nearly $1 trillion. The deficit is still way too high. But if you think only about the problems in government, the debt ceilings, the fiscal cliff, the issues in Congress where the Republicans and the Democrats can't agree on the time of day, the fact that governments have tended to kick the can down the road rather than solving the problems through very, very tough choices, you get very negative. But if you look at the private sector, consumers are coming back. They're buying more houses. That's good for BC lumber. They're buying more cars. Good for Ontario. American businesses have strong balance sheets and more cash on hand than I've seen in my life. Those things show that the residual part of the US economy, that outside of government, is actually quite strong. And American businesses are doing very well on the export side into emerging markets. They are moving very, very quickly in that particular regard. So that economy is outside of the issues that you might see dwelled on in CNN, CNBC, and the like, is actually doing better. Mind you, in a good year, their growth may be 2 to 2.5%. Next year may be a little higher because they're playing catch-up ball. They haven't bought houses for a long time, haven't bought cars for a long time. They still don't have the same amount of employment they had in 2008. So they may get a little bit of boost there, but that market growth is still going to be relatively strong. One of the ways that they're doing that growth, of course, is by keeping interest rates low. So when I look at the outlook for interest rates in Canada, you have to look south of the border because our markets react very, very closely to what's happening there. And we got a couple of things going on. A guy by the name of Ben Bernanke, head of the Federal Reserve, has decided that he's going to keep short-term interest rates low until, well, last year he was saying until the end of 2014, which is beyond his mandate, actually. And then in the summer he was saying, it's probably going to be the middle part of 2015 before I raise short-term interest rates. And now he's saying, well, we need the unemployment rate below 6.5% and inflation goes up a little bit, that's okay. We're going to keep pedal to the metal, low interest rates for a while. And you may ask why? Well, low interest rates, according to Economics 101, helps get the economy going and gets consumers borrowing more, although consumers are pretty cautious and businesses are cautious still because they've been watching too much in the way of media that the world is about to end because of all the problems in Europe and everywhere else. But they're gradually getting into gear in spending because interest rates are at lifetime lows. Low interest rates are a bonus to borrowers and a penalty to investors and pension funds and a whole lot of other things. That's an issue we will face later. But interest rates, short-term interest rates, are going to stay low in the US for the foreseeable future. If you're in business, of course, you don't expand your business on the basis of overnight money. You would like a 5-year term or 10-year term, perhaps. And there, the US is holding rates down as well, and the world is cooperating. The US has won the reverse beauty contest. They're less ugly than the US. They're less ugly than Europe in terms of many fundamentals. So global investors are saying there's no default risk there. There might be problems in Europe, so we will buy safety, security, and liquidity in buying US Treasury bills and bonds, and that brings US rates down. Even though the U.S. lost its AAA credit rating, rates have come down. And by the way, Canada is one of the few countries in the world that has a AAA credit rating. We don't realize in this country how well we are off. You got to travel outside the country to figure out that we truly are living in the best country in the world. But in the U.S., they're holding longer-term interest rates fairly low because in addition to American buyers and Canadian buyers and Russian buyers and Chinese buyers of U.S. Treasury bills and bonds, they have found a new buyer. And that person is Ben Bernanke. The Federal Reserve is buying U.S. government debt. And you may say, gee, that's funny, you know. How does that work? Well, it's called quantitative easing nowadays. When I was in school, it was called printing money. But what happens basically is that President Obama needs a lot of money. He doesn't need over $1 trillion this year. He needs slightly under $1 trillion, but that's still a lot of money. And so he goes to the Treasury Department, they print the bonds, and they sell them around the world. And when they sell those bonds, they are now selling some of them to the Federal Reserve. In other words, the government is buying its own bonds. And you may say, well, they can't be buying a lot, right? Well, they're actually buying $85 billion worth of government bonds and mortgage-backed securities every month. So 85 billion times 12. Gee, they're buying over $1 trillion worth of government debt. In a year, they're financing their own deficit. By the end of the year, the U.S. government will own 25% of its outstanding debt. And you might think, gee, that can't go on forever, right? You know, what's happening basically is the Federal Reserve is printing the money, giving it to the Treasury. The Treasury is paying foreign investors off with this new money that's being printed, but the foreign investors aren't putting it back in the U.S. because they're holding on to the money because they're looking around the world for safety, security, and liquidity, and the U.S. still looks reasonably good because there's no default risk there. They give it to consumers, and the consumers say, but yeah, we still got too high debt, we got to pay down, we got to bring our savings up, so they put it back in the bank. Businesses have been watching too much media. They think the world is too negative, so they've been rather cautious about spending the money as well. They put it back in the bank. The banks don't want this money because they don't see the lending opportunities yet to put it, so they put it back in their bank, which of course is the Federal Reserve, which is what we call pushing on a string. It starts out with the Fed, it ends back with the Fed. There's no inflation in the economy yet because American businesses and consumers are beginning to spend more. We don't have a problem with inflation right now. We won't probably have an inflation problem until beyond next year, but the type of policies that are being followed that keep interest rates down in the here and now inevitably will lead to inflationary pressures until those policy issues are corrected. The Bank of Canada is not printing money because our system is the strongest in the world. Very important to realize this particular context. So the Americans are printing money, holding interest rates down, and in fact, why would Congress actually want to solve their fiscal problems anyway? Because they're being able to raise 10-year money today for 1.6%. Inflation's around that level. The world is giving them money for nothing. So why solve your problems now? It's only when interest rates go up that the U.S. problems will actually come home to roost on the fiscal side. But between then and now, the drag that the U.S. government is putting on growth is more than offset by the revitalization of the business sector, and we're going to see 2 to 2.5% growth. If the government didn't have those problems, we would see U.S. growth well north of 3%, which would be much better news for Canada. So what does all this mean for Canada? Well, first of all, the world that I've described is influencing our financial markets and our economic outlook in a very profound way. If you look at the strongest growth provinces right now, it is Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland, Labrador, yes, because they are much more plugged into the global commodity markets that are being influenced by these trends that I've been talking about. Ontario has been growing below the national average because the U.S. market has been relatively soft, certainly a lot softer than the offshore markets. And the trend has been going on for a while. You may be surprised to know that the average income in Ontario used to be 10% above the national average at the beginning of this millennium and is now below the national average. And average weekly earnings in Newfoundland are higher than they are here. When did that happen? The last decade, because of the trends that I've been talking about. So are we envious? We should be very, very pleased that we have some strong growing provinces in this country because our industry service those provinces. Our industry service the U.S. revitalization, and the trick is to get them, our industry, to look broader in order to service directly some of those fast growing markets. BC and Ontario are being held back in terms of growth, in part because the housing market isn't as strong as it was in the past. BC has already gone through, at least the lower mainland, the Vancouver area has gone through a bit of a housing correction already. Volumes and prices are down. In the GTA, volumes are down. Prices are still relatively buoyant. Stay tuned. I believe there's going to be a bit of a correction. It's not going to be a free fall. We don't have a bubble because household finances are stronger here. Employment is at record levels in this country. But inevitably, that's not going to be a driver of our economy. So slower growth mode in Ontario is a reality, even with the U.S. expansion. But we will have growth. We live in a population that is expanding. In Europe, it is falling. And that by itself creates retail sales opportunities, a whole lot of things. But what we have to focus in on is effective policies that position ourselves for the growth of the future. So when I'm talking to governments across the country, I'm suggesting a number of things. Number one, getting rid of deficits is essential because having a strong government balance sheet is a strategic competitive advantage. In Canada, we don't have to raise the taxes and gut social services the way inevitably it is going to happen in Europe and will probably be happening in the US as well. We can develop a competitive tax environment and we have more leeway on infrastructure simply because our balance sheet is in better shape. One of the things we have to do is control healthcare costs because they're rising very, very rapidly. They're squeezing out other areas that we have to fund. But number one, in terms of strategic priority beyond that, is building our infrastructure and ensuring it is world class. Because we're not competing in mass production runs anymore. We're competing in knowledge, we're competing in value added in a way we haven't done in the past. And while you might be thinking about infrastructure in terms of roads or communication or sewers or a whole lot of other things that we would be normally thinking about, number one, job one, is raising the average skill level of our population. In many parts of the world, people are being left behind because they don't have the skills. Income disparities are widening substantially. They have in the US for a very long period of time. They will continue to do so, and in Europe, they're about to widen substantially. Canada, we have more strength. We have less of a problem in that area. But as I travel across this country, I am in provinces where people do not have jobs, and jobs don't have people because of the skills mismatch. What we have to do, in my view, is rethink our educational process. In many scores, we are right at the top in terms of academic achievement. But what we have to do is more. I'm not going to go through primary, secondary, and post-secondary in any material sense, and there's a lot of work to do in the primary and secondary grades in order to energize students and inform them of what they're actually there for, and getting businesses more involved. It's more than just Take Your Kids to Work Day, which is a learning partnership initiative. It's more plugging into why you're actually there in the first place and what you should be enjoying or hoping for through this educational process. When you get up to the post-secondary period of time, though, we spend a lot of money on universities. Colleges need more resources. We need more effectively to blend the college and a university experience in a way that is more student-centered. One of the things that's happening is we send our kids out and they get a 3 or 4 year BA. They get out, they can't find a job, and they go back into the community college network. So a person is being trained for 6 years after high school in order to get out into the workforce. That is an incredible waste of resources. We have to rethink this. And moreover, while we should be funding excellence in many areas, high tech and the like, and we hear those pitches all the time, the real issue is bringing all Canadians along, raising educational attainment. If we leave people behind, we will be facing widening income disparities. We will be sowing the seeds of big problems in the future. This is not what we should be doing. So when I look at Ontario, when I look at the Barrie area, when I look at Southern Ontario in terms of the opportunities, there's a world of opportunities out there. But they're different than they were in the past. And in order to take advantage of those opportunities, one of the highest priorities is figuring out how we train people to be resilient, adaptable, and flexible, and have the skills in the future that in some cases weren't even dreamed about 100 years ago when I went to school. The world is changing rapidly. We have to change with it. Thank you very much.
And I can tell you that, asking Warren Jestin to share the stage with Jeff Lehman is like asking you two to share the stage with Justin Bieber. But I do want to say thank you very much, Dr. Jestin, for this, because I think we too often are guilty in the course of our daily lives at missing some of the bigger picture. And if I could just respond to one thing that you said before I talk a bit about what's going on here in Barrie. I was fascinated to hear you say it will be those small and medium-sized companies that access the auto sector in China and the emerging opportunities in some of the BRIC countries. When we went to China last fall as part of the trade mission with Mayor Scarpitti and others, one of the individuals who went with me was Mark Schick, who's right here with me today, and that was exactly why Mark went. His medium-sized manufacturing operation is an incredibly dynamic company that is looking at new markets. And I do believe it is companies like Mark's and companies like many of yours in the room that can access those opportunities. That's why we went. And I believe that there is a role, especially when it's small and medium-sized companies that are making those connections into those markets directly. There's a role for the communities in which they operate to make those connections with the markets on the other side of the world. So I want to talk a bit over the course of the next 20 minutes. We do have a lot to talk about, but I'm going to talk about it really quickly because, as always in Barrie, there are so many things going on. I want to give you a bit of an update on our local economy. I want to talk about the city's fiscal condition. I want to talk about downtown, our major initiatives, but mostly I want to talk to you about what we are doing to create the conditions for economic success, because fundamentally I think that's the role of government, to create the conditions for economic success, to create the social infrastructure and the physical infrastructure that allow you to grow your companies and create jobs. And I think I should start by saying all of us as council and as the city have had the same vision for some years. And it is a vision that we are pursuing, I believe, on many fronts. And that is that this is not a bedroom community, that we are going to be an economic center, a community that is distinct unto itself, not a suburb of the GTA, but connected to it, but one where there are more opportunities for people to work here, and which has its own distinct, strong identity and its own distinct and strong economy. We want to be a living room, not a bedroom. And I think we have made some strides towards those goals in this past year, and I'll tell you a bit about them and tell you where I don't think we've made a lot of progress and where I think we need to go. Starting with the economy, as I mentioned, I am an economist, so I got to have my graphs. This is jobs, and this is from the Labor Force Survey. This is data for the Barrie Census Metropolitan Area back to 2009. We have seen a 25% increase in the number of people with jobs in the Barrie Census Metropolitan Area in the last 4 years. That outpaces nearly every other city in Ontario. And although we had a very difficult period about 2 years ago where the unemployment rate briefly spiked, the overall growth in employment in our city has been remarkable. And the impact on that can be seen in the unemployment rate for the Barrie CMA. It has started after several years of sitting during the recession at about 9.5%, above the provincial average, above the national average. It has now trended down, and the latest 3-month moving average is 7.3%, which is below the Ontario rate. We still have a long way to go, and I think what these higher level statistics hide is the nature and the quality of the employment that is created. In many cases, replacing manufacturing jobs which were very stable, which often were longer-term jobs and had benefits and those sorts of things associated with them. Those jobs are harder to find. That's not the standard in many parts of our economy today. But the overall trend is very, very positive indeed, and we have started to move well above our peers. This number is my favorite number because I get to call us Canada's hardest working city, and I have a number to back it up. Our participation rate, the participation rate is the percentage of the population that is in the workforce. Our participation rate is 75.4%. It is higher than any other Canadian census metropolitan area, any of them. Higher than any of the cities out west, higher than any of the cities around Toronto, the younger cities around Toronto, which also have high rates. You can see on here Calgary, Regina, Guelph, places that also have high participation rates. But this is one of the things that makes us so unique. 3/4 of our population is in the workforce. The average is 2/3. And that leads to many things, but among them, tremendous opportunities for employers to retain employees. And for us to use this as part of our competitive advantage as we make the pitch out there to grow our economy. Downtown, you saw in the video a picture of the Collier Center. This is what it will look like. It's the first high-rise office building in the downtown in, I believe, about 30 years. There will be about 500 people working here. This is at the corner of Collier and Mulcaster, and construction is underway. That's the 2 cranes you can see downtown. I think what's significant about this, other than the built form and the fact that the investment was made in office space in the core, is it's the first truly urban mixed-use development down there. It has retail, it has an 8-story residential condo, and it has an office tower. And it reflects the change in our downtown, and I think the city's vision for the downtown, which has changed even over the past several years. We increasingly are understanding that downtown needs to be more than just a commercial center, more than just the civic center, more than just a cultural center, which it is, all of those things. It also needs to be a residential neighborhood. And there are increasingly people choosing that neighborhood and that lifestyle to live. And that we anticipate to be a growing part of the residential market, housing market in the city for years to come. Crime. This is not unique to Barrie. The crime rate across Canada has been dropping. It's a wonderful thing. Our crime rate locally has been plummeting. This is the actual number, total reported crimes by year for the last 5 years in the city of Barrie. And it's dropped from nearly 10,000 reported crimes in 2008 to, in 2012, less than 8,000. That's a remarkable drop, and it is, as well, far in excess of what our peer municipalities are experiencing. So on those fronts, things truly are going, I think, very well on those indicators. And what we have started to see in the past few years, as Barrie's economy has changed, as we have started to attract new types of uses, is some broader attention. It's always nice to get into Report on Business, and that first article about why cold Canada is becoming a hotspot for data centers featured our community very prominently. You know, I was speaking with Dr. Justin before we started this morning about PowerStream, our electricity company. One of the reasons we were able to attract the IBM data center, the first greenfield data center for that company in 20 years, one of the reasons we were able to attract them was the reliability of our power. And that comes from the strength of our utility, PowerStream, which has an incredibly high reliability index and a very good track record of working with major industries to supply their needs. And the unique needs of a data center are quite different. Jobs and investment. What this slide tells you, other than the fact that I only have 2 or 3 ties, I really do like that tie. There's no way around it. I really like that. I'm not wearing it today, but I do like that tie. These are 3, I think, very significant facilities that opened in the past year. Of course, our RVH and the Simcoe Muskoka Regional Cancer Care Center, which came with 700 or 800 new jobs that have been hired over the past several years. On the right is myself with John Lutz from IBM, and in the middle there is Ross Beatty from HGS, and HGS recently chose Barrie for their inbound contact center, which will employ 700 people. Now the bad news, because it's not all sunshine and roses. Our fiscal condition as a city is not good. However, it's better than we thought it would be at this point. So here's the situation. About 3-4 years ago, as the city started to really look hard at its books, I think we realized, and probably it should have been realized earlier, that the city was not on a sustainable path fiscally. That the capital expenditures that had been required of us associated with growth, the pace of service expansion, was going to require either very large tax increases or something fundamentally to change for us to be on a sustainable fiscal footing. The lines you're looking at, blue is our long-range financial plan, and this is our tax-committed capital reserve balance. It was actually forecast to be lower than it is today. That's the good news. The bad news is the line's going the wrong way. And notwithstanding that big drop in 2012, although we are a little bit above plan, this speaks to a fundamental issue that we've got, which is that the city does not have the fiscal capacity to fund growth. It simply doesn't. We will have to make choices about how we are going to fund the infrastructure that is required for the next round of growth in this city, because the reserve balances are very, very low. What has Council been doing about that? Well, a number of things. We've substantially downsized our capital plan. Capital expenditures in the last 2 years in terms of infrastructure have been a fraction of what they've been in previous years. We are on a 12-year path to increasing our contribution back to these reserves to bend that curve back to positive. And there's real pain in that because we have to ask people for a property tax increase to do that. And it's not always easy to say we have to put more money away because we've got to service that infrastructure and maintain it. I am not willing to have us be on a financial path where we get to a situation where, like in Toronto or Montreal, we've got bridges or expressways that are literally falling apart. We cannot allow our infrastructure to get to that kind of a condition, and it is going to require us to build those reserves and improve the city's financial condition, and that means tough choices, either service cuts or tax increases, or a little bit of both, or what is even better, and a third component to it, new ways of delivering things. And that is an easy thing for politicians to say, but there are savings to be found by doing things differently. And that's certainly a topic for another day. But I want to tell you a little bit about how we are hoping to stimulate and grow our economy. Because the other side of this, the other side, of course, from expenditures is revenue growth. And improving the city's financial condition. I agree with our economist, our esteemed guest today. There is a new normal, and it is slower growth in this province. Governments have to get adjusted to revenue growth at 2%, not 3% anymore. But there are things that we can do to grow our own economy, and the more we are as a city, the better our bottom line will be. This is, as another indicator, tax debt. We were forecast to be on the blue line up at about $130 million today. Council has made a series of choices to reduce that, funding more projects through pay-as-we-go, funding through gas tax, putting off some work, and even cancelling some projects. And as a result, tax-supported debt is $80 million today rather than the $130 that was forecast in the long-range financial plan. Now, we are still carrying very large debt in our water and wastewater budgets. But if you follow Council, you will see coming to us in the next few weeks reports on those conditions and what we are doing to improve them as well. I love this slide. This is outstanding debt per capita, and it's just to put the debt into context. I'm on the left. That's per capita debt held by the City of Barrie. In the middle is the provincial government, and on the right is the federal government. The federal and provincial governments are both carrying $17,000, $18,000 per Canadian or Ontarian of debt. We're carrying $2,000 per resident of Barrie. And I think the point is, since we can't, by legislation, run a deficit, overall, our fiscal condition is maybe a little bit better than our peers in senior government. That's not to say it's good, but we have maintained our credit rating because I think we're making some of the tough choices, and we're going to continue to do that. So what's going on? Well, growth, of course. Our annexation land plans will come to Council before the summer break. This is a comprehensive plan for the lands that were brought in from Innisfil, nearly 3,000 hectares. We are going to be protecting roughly a third of them under the various legislation, environmental protection legislation, but they are fundamentally focused on a different way of growing. It will be a broader range of housing types in the neighborhoods. They will be neighborhoods that evoke the best of traditional neighborhoods in Barrie. The street patterns are grids instead of the spaghetti streets that we've had with traditional suburb or a more recent suburban design. And we are trying to create neighborhoods that have more services right in them, so people don't have to drive to everything. More local shops, more parks and unprogrammed green spaces that reflect the way people live today. The plans are to bring the infrastructure master plans to Council at the same time, and they are very expensive. And again, getting back to our fiscal condition, we are going to have a very frank conversation with the development community and with our residents about how we pay for this growth. It is going to be difficult and expensive. That being said, the plans are there, and I believe the ability to move quickly into growth, particularly for our new employment lands and the first round of neighborhoods, we are in good shape. The infrastructure is there, and the capacity exists to be able to move quickly. Other major initiatives, some of them were mentioned during the video. The first overhaul of Barrie's transit system in 40 years. We're moving to an all-new route model, which is based on 7 hubs rather than a single downtown hub. And some people wonder why this has been such a big focus for us. Well, because people told us it needed to be, and it was fascinating that when we did a survey and asked people what were the top priorities for services that they felt Barrie needed to invest to improve. Number 1, roads. Number 2, transit. And we heard from employers, particularly in the South End, that our service today does not help them get their workforce to work, that there are a lot of gaps, that the service is too inconvenient, it takes too long, you've got to wait too long for a bus, there aren't buses in the right places. So we have blown up the existing model, and we are introducing a brand new one on August 17th, which is a Saturday in the summer. When you're going to tick a lot of people off because their bus goes somewhere else, pick a Saturday in the summer. That's the advice I was given. Not only because it's the summertime and traffic's a little less, but also because, and it's a Saturday, so it's not a work day, but also because if they're stuck outside, it's a little nicer out than if you do it in November. We're also, of course, we have a plan for road work called the Road Ahead, and there is a lot of road work to do in Barrie. But our road infrastructure is relatively new, but what we've got is a real dichotomy. We have older areas where the road infrastructure is in very, very rough shape, and we have some basic roads that needed doing long ago. Bayview in the stretch between Big Bay Point and Little, Huronia Road from Young down to the South City limits, Essa Road. These badly need doing, and it's catch up for us at this point. We are slowly getting to them. We also have a new sustainable waste management strategy coming, and this is something that I love talking about garbage. That's one of those great things that mayors get to do, is talk about how we handle garbage. But you know why it's important? Aside from the environmental impact, it is so incredibly expensive. Look at what the county went through over Site 41 trying to locate a new landfill facility. Can you imagine trying to find a location and open a new landfill in the city of Barrie? Absolutely impossible. We need to make our landfill last as long as we can, and capacity in that site is literally gold, because the option is trucking our garbage to Michigan at an inordinate cost. So expanding recycling, keeping things out of the landfill, is a direct fiscal benefit to everybody in Barrie. It's better for the environment, of course, and it needs to be a major priority for us. And it's something we can all do together if we shift some of our services and expand the recycling services that we've got. I want to close today by talking about Ideas in Motion and what we are doing to support economic growth in Barrie. Carla Ladd, our CAO, is with us today, and Carla did wonderful things in Kitchener with economic development and tying together the concept of a much broader group of resources for economic development, because growing our economy is beyond just city marketing or industrial land. It is all things. It is quality of life. It is attracting a talented workforce, which means everything that we do in many ways is about creating jobs. When we're creating recreation centers and rec programs for people to create a better quality of life for families, to help them stay in this community, that's economic development. When we're investing in culture, that is economic development. And of course, when we invest in education, as we chose to do with our donation to Georgian College for the Sadlin Center for Health and Wellness, and as we are continuing to do with our focus on post-secondary education, and I should say on skilled trades, because this is a very, very important point, and I'm glad Dr. Justin talked about it. We have this paradox, this bizarre situation in this country where we have great jobs going unfilled because we don't have Canadians trained for them. We have welding jobs in Barrie that are posted for more than a year without any applicants. It's crazy. And it's crazy because we have somehow got some holes in our system that are not attracting enough candidates. The education programs are often there. Georgian College is a tremendous skilled trades program. There are some I would love to bring to Barrie and expand. But the education is there, but they can't get the students into the pipeline. And often that's a perception issue, because there's a belief, for whatever reason, that we should steer our kids into the professions. And that's a tremendous opportunity as well. I'm one to talk. But I think we need to understand there are job opportunities out there that we are not sending our kids towards. And we need to change the perception of those jobs, because the perception isn't accurate. They are clean tech jobs. They are incredibly high paying. They are very, very stable, and they are in demand in all parts of the country. One of the biggest reasons we can't get welders here is because they can get paid a lot more out in the oil patch. But we have those opportunities in Barrie, and MPP Jackson and I put together an initiative called Train in Trades, which you will hear a lot more about soon. We're going to do a major event in October. But it is trying to address this problem through communications and advocacy, and also through the events showcasing those jobs to the next generation of our workforce, because those opportunities exist right here. When we went and looked, we did a search. We had some research done to look at job postings in Barrie. There were 400 skilled trades jobs just in the industrial trades, just in about 10 of the Red Seal trades, such as industrial electrician and machinist. 400 jobs in Barrie available as a snapshot in November of last year. So what is our broader vision, though? How do we support the economy? Getting back to our job as government to create the conditions for economic success. Our CAO led a process with you, the business community, called Ideas in Motion, to come up with some priorities for us and update our own economic development plans. And these are those 5 priorities. Create that open for business climate. And as much as we have made some steps to improve the city's customer service and working with business, we have a long way to go. We need to continue to make our processes easier to navigate and our customer service more responsive. Alignment is a key one, and I'll come back to it because that's what I want to close with today. The Business Ambassadors, many of you are familiar with that program. Mayor Hamilton, I believe, is here today. It was under Mayor Hamilton that this program was initiated. We had a very strong response saying, you need to bring this back. It was a great idea. It was a great idea then. It's a good idea. It's a great idea now. And there are plans in the works to bring back that organization to help market Barrie out to our clients, to use supply and distribution chains to recruit more businesses to Barrie, and so that we can all participate in growing our economy. Being university ready, and there were some slides about what we've been trying to do with the Centre of Excellence in the centre of our city to create an opportunity. Laurentian University has committed $14 million towards building an undergraduate campus in Barrie, and if we receive provincial approval, that is a major priority of this council. And fifth, our identity, and that's how we market ourselves, and you will hear more on that in coming years. But we need to expand how we market ourselves. And of course, going back to Dr. Jeston's remarks, we need to be out in new markets. There is a reason that some of the leading cities in this country and civic leaders, Mayor Nenshi in Calgary, Mayor McCallion in Mississauga, are doing a lot of work with overseas markets and building links through the expats that are here, the Chinese business associations, to create opportunities for their companies in new markets. And this is something that the city has only begun to do, but we are committed to doing more of. So I want to introduce to you today, as I finish off, Invest Barrie, which is that key alignment goal. I've said to this audience before, you may remember from breakfast past, what if we could take all of those organizations that are out there, many of them are city departments or city supported, and others that are services that support economic development in our community. We have many of them. Many are very small. What if we could take that and turn it this way and vertically align them so that we have a lot more resources and they're all working together with a coordinated effort? You know, Hanny and our Economic Development Department have done tremendous work, and we have a cultural department that is supporting the growth of our cultural economy. We have tourism. We have a airport, Lake Simcoe Regional Airport. We have the Greater Barrie Enterprise Center. We have many of these organizations. And what we want to do is significantly ramp up by coordinating and combining some of these, our capacity to support economic development. This is the new organizational chart for the City of Barrie. The three organizations on the right, Invest Barrie, which is about expanding economic development, Access Barrie, which is about customer service, and Innovate Barrie, which is about improving our services, doing them more efficiently, and particularly using technology to improve municipal services. This is a realignment of your municipality, your municipal corporation led by our CAO, and it is designed to focus us intently on the goals of our community, creating jobs, improving customer service, and changing the way we do things to be more effective and cost-effective. So Invest Barrie, which you will hear much more about in the coming months, brings together today the Culture Department, Economic Development, our Downtown Coordinator, and a Small Business Startup and Growth, the Greater Barrie Enterprise Center. We are combining these resources, and we wish to grow that group into a significantly amped up economic development powerhouse that is designed to assist you with growing your companies and designed to take that broad view. So coming back to Council's vision, which I think is very important. I think we understand that our economy is only going to be successful if we take that big view, if we understand that our people and attracting skilled workers and providing them the opportunities to get the jobs in today's economy, those are the keys to economic success. And we require a bigger and broader vision in which to do that. So this is the organization that we're going to task with that. And it is a significantly larger and expanded effort than the city has been able to put together to date. I want to, I think, my last slide today, close off by saying that, you know, as a mayor, we get to do speeches like this and go to a lot of ribbon cuttings, as you saw in the video. It's a wonderful, wonderful job. It is never, ever boring. But mayors cannot accomplish a single thing without their councils. All decisions at the City of Barrie are made by a team of 11 people, many of whom are here today. And I have been so incredibly blessed with a council that is very professional and very supportive of this vision. I believe they share this vision of us being a living room and not a bedroom community. And I believe that they have worked together extremely well over the past 2 years to accomplish some of the things that we have done to date. And if we have accomplished anything, or I've accomplished anything, it's because of their support and their effort. So I want to thank the members of council who are here today for what you have done. We are working together for you as a city. So our vision is very simple. It is that this community can build on some of the economic strength that you're seeing, take advantage of those new opportunities that we are seeing in front of us and that Dr. Justin told us about earlier this morning. We have a lot of work yet to do, an awful lot of work yet to do on many of these fronts. But I can tell you, I have a real sense that things are moving today. Whether it is the downtown, whether it is the economic growth, the new companies that we have seen coming in, some of the lights going back on at our factories that have been vacant for some years. There are things happening in this community, and it is in no small part because of all of you who are the business leaders in this community that we're able to grow our economy. I want to thank you very, very much for coming today and being part of this exciting event. Thank you very much.